Tonight we call Nicodemus as a witness. Nicodemus, we appreciate your appearance here in this trial as a scholarly witness. Finally, after listening to a tax collector and that other woman, we have a witness with some credibility. Let me explain to you, the jury, Nicodemus' importance in this trial. As he is a witness here, he appears unlike the other witnesses. He appears as an objective observer. He is an expert in the law, and he is a man capable of using reason and logic to separate emotions from just wishful thinking and facts. He is going to be able to deliver to us facts of the case. So Nicodemus is a Pharisee. He was a member of the Sanhedrin, which is the highest governing body of the Jews. That Sanhedrin group is made up of 70 priests, scribes, Pharisees, and a few distinguished laymen. And as he was here part of the Sanhedrin, he recognized the high priest as the president of that group. This group, the Sanhedrin, they decided matters of religious law, and they settled disputes that fell under religious law. Now, he is retired from that body, and we are pleased to have him with us here tonight. Do I have all that correct?
Yes, we were the court of highest appeal, and I'd always believed that we were objective and that we were fair every time. And yes, I guess you could say that I've retired. I just felt I had to leave just because of the way things were going with the trial of Jesus.
Well, we are sure that before this very respectable group of leaders, Jesus did receive a fair hearing. But before we get to that, would you please tell us how you came to know about Jesus and if you had any personal interaction with him?
Well, I'd heard of him, of course. It was being spread all around the area. There was talk about the miracles he'd been doing, his teachings, mostly considering God's love and other items. And then, of course, he was attracting lots of attention just by those things. And then he also had this magnetism, this sort of strange charisma that made people feel like he could peer into human hearts. But the first time I ever saw him in action, it was the day before Passover, and he caused quite a stir in the temple.
So, you are saying that he is a disturber of the peace? Is that due to his radical preaching?
No, this was different. It really wasn't even the preaching. It was an incident that showed a side of Jesus that caught some people off guard. It was a side of him that they hadn't seen yet. I had just come from a court proceeding, and when I saw him, he was actually looking at those who sold sacrificial animals and at the money changers. And then there was this look of untethered rage that came over him, like God himself was offended. I never approved of the temple court being used as a storefront myself, but it was a tradition, and besides, it was bringing in some money. But Jesus didn't care about tradition or economics. He made a whip of some rope, and he drove the merchants out. He was furious, but it was a fury that comes from a deep-seated zeal for God. There was an argument afterward between him and some of the leaders over his authority in the temple. I guess it was his response to their challenge, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will rise it up. That led me to do something I'd never dreamed of doing. You see, his words didn't make any sense at all, but there was something in the way that he said them that made me want to hear more.
You heard that. Untethered rage. And in his anger, he showed no regard for our traditions, no regard for what is important to us. And so you must, I assume, you had the guards bring him before the Sanhedrin so you could question him.
Not really. Actually, what I did is I found out where Jesus was staying, and I went to see him. He stirred something inside of me. I didn't know what it was at the time. I just had to talk to him. At the same time, I did have a position to maintain and felt it best not to be seen. So I snuck to see him out of the cover of darkness. We shared kind of a strange discussion that left me with even greater questions and inner struggles.
Nicodemus, that is some great undercover detective work. Did he explain to you about his actions at the temple, the things that he said about the temple? Did he give some kind of new interpretation to the law?
No. In fact, it was a lot more personal than that. I'd hardly begun with the usual pleasantries and back and forth when he told me I must be born again. I couldn't believe my ears. I had no idea what he was talking about. This man was considered to be a wise rabbi, well educated. He's over 30 years old. He's got to be a smart guy. He's doing his job. but he was asking me to do the impossible. Even the most ignorant shepherd knows that a person can't return to the womb and be reborn. It was nonsense. It was senseless at the time.
Well, did you point this out to him? Confront his delusional ramblings? Perhaps the defense will want to change Jesus' plea to not guilty due to insanity.
Yes, I did question what he said. I explained that a man of my age could hardly go through the birth process, but then he explained that he wasn't talking about physical birth. He was talking about the spiritual rebirth that Christians would eventually come to call baptism. He went on to say that since I couldn't understand his teachings when he compared them to common earthly teaching, how could I understand the deeper truths that he wished to share? There was an odd change at this point. He stopped speaking for himself. He dropped the singular pronoun saying I, and then started saying we. He was speaking for himself and God. He gave his authority that he had come from heaven. He spoke of being lifted up on a pole in the same way that Moses lifted the serpent in the wilderness so that our ancestors could be saved. He claimed that those who believe in him would be saved also. He said that God had sent him as an act of love to save people, not to condemn them. He said that people must leave the darkness of disbelief and evil and come into the light of God's truth. I wish I'd understand then what I do now. I wish I would have seen in that brief moment what Jesus was trying to say to me. I just hadn't come out of the darkness that night, but out of the darkness of sin into the light of truth. He was inviting me to the joy of eternal light. I might have defended him then.
You must have been terribly offended by what he said. Of course, you confronted his blasphemy, I assume. I mean, right? You confronted him for speaking for him and God. We? Where does that? That's blasphemy. I hope you confronted him for that. Or are you saying that now you have been won over by all this talk of rebirth and love? You're already testified that this is nonsensical. Surely some kind of reason dictates that Jesus was just another raving lunatic. Stirring up trouble among the people, endangering the peace of Jerusalem.
Well, at the time, it did seem unreasonable, as I said, and it really did take me a long time to see the light Jesus has invited me to and to step into that dark night. Maybe if I'd been less determined to rationalize and more open to the faith the Spirit was planting in my heart, I could have reasoned with my colleagues on the Sanhedrin. I might have persuaded them to give Jesus a true hearing, but I came into the light a little too late. He was condemned and he was crucified. God, the creator of the universe, was crucified. In the end, all I could do was see that he got a decent burial.
Nicodemus, what do you mean? Have you lost your mind? I'm truly shocked that someone of your intelligence and and learning could have been taken by this Jesus. You are dismissed, just like you were dismissed from the Sanhedrin.
You know what finally convinced me, made me a believer? When I looked at Jesus dying on the cross and realized everything he had told me that dark night had indeed come true, that he was going to die to save us. And by saying that, he saved me. His words came back to me then. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. That kind of love and sacrifice doesn't make sense to us. But that love is what my heart and everyone's heart truly cries out for.
Poor man. Poor deluded man. He's let something cloud his ability to think rationally. I think that he is actually beginning to believe in this Jesus.